Hockey fans, welcome to NYI FYI with Sean Croft and Chris Hessel.
Welcome to Chris Hessel live on NYI FYI. First show in a couple of weeks, now that we are into the Olympic break. And somehow, they still give us way too much to talk about, even when they're not playing.
You know, it's funny. We had the Olympics started, and hope was that the Islanders would have a good week and kind of get back into things, and of course they didn't. And after we last had a show, you know, back to their old tricks. You know, losing games that they should be winning, starting the selling process. It looks like we're preparing for another year lost, and as you said, you know, they always give us something to talk about, and the return of group therapy.
Yep.
Here we are.
Sell, 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 sell. That is the game. Sell, sell, sell.
I mean,
from playoff contention, hog-nosed series against the Cup favorite Pittsburgh Penguins, to basement dwellers again. I mean, welcome to the New York Islanders.
Welcome to group therapy again. I don't even know where you begin. I mean, it's so fun. My only reaction, forget about who it was, what it was they got. My first reaction to the news of the Bouchard and Reagan trade, right after the game ended, was just to laugh.
Like, really?
I just
like,
it's,
you
it's
had,
like, we are
but
again.
wait, but the Islanders never have free agents walk away.
Honestly,
you can't have a free agent walk away from the New York Islanders.
I'm surprised that they got anything.
They have to get something for everybody, because you can't just have a piece of crap free agent like Peter Regan, or even worse, Pierre-Marc Bouchard, walk away. You can't. They can't go. Not without us getting something. We have to get something for them.
Well, I will say it is kind of hilarious. A fourth-round pick for the two of them. I'm surprised that they even had that value. Even together, I'm surprised they had that value. But that's something that the Chicago Blackhawks thought they needed. By the way, Pierre-Marc Bouchard off to a great start with the Blackhawks minor league team. I thought maybe you'd be interested in that. So they're getting a good return on their investment of a fourth-round draft pick, and I think what's next year's draft. I don't know. And here we are. It's just, you know, it is disappointing that, you know, it's another year of sell, as you said, sell, 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 sell. And you even said it. I mean, as soon as the news came out, and you send me the text message, and you go, "Here we go again, sell, sell, sell." And you know, it's frustrating. You know, you certainly understand wanting to get something for the players that have value. The Andrew McDonald's, the Thomas Vaneks, if he's not resigning before July 1, and it certainly doesn't look like he's going to. I understand getting for that, but I can understand, like you're saying, the frustration of getting, forget about who it is. It's, you know, Joe Schmo, the fourth liner, or the AHL tweener. He's going for a fifth-round pick.
Because we just have to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, he'll walk as a free agent.
You know.
But we can't lose him for nothing. And the other thing is, you start just getting rid of, as you said, the tweeners here. It's like, when you just start unloading all the garbage, the first thing you do is unload your crap.
Yeah.
It's the season's done.
Well, no.
That's exactly what that says.
This is the shot fired.
That's it. It's okay. We're selling. We quit. Just get rid of everything that's going to walk away.
Anything with a beating heart.
Anything with a beating heart that's going to be a free agent has to go.
When the Islanders were playing, I forget which game it was by this point. It was one of the games that was on NBC Sports Network, and they've been on NBC Sports Network a lot in the last couple of weeks. But they were talking about, in particular, you know, if you're John Tavares, you have to wonder at what point does he start to get frustrated. And the fact that some people in the media are starting to talk about that, it really makes you wonder, you know what? Yes, at what point does he get frustrated? Now, I'm not saying that he'll say anything, because that's not her style. But, you know, when you look at what's going on here, and you know, it's the famous saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This team talks so much about becoming a big-time, you know, team and moving to Brooklyn, and there's the talk of them getting the money to actually go there, and oh, we're going to infuse talent, and oh, we're here to win a Stanley Cup, and this and that. You know, 500 mediocrity is not acceptable, and then nothing else happens. And here we are again, below 500, mired in mediocrity. Forget about mediocrity. I think we're on pace right now to draft fourth. And you know,
with terrible coaching,
and as
that continues to,
the song remains the same.
Yep.
And here we are again. It's like, you know, lather, rinse, repeat. So certainly the trade of Bouchard and Reagan is the shot fired to the hockey world, the fan base. You know, the New York Islanders are once again
quitting
the season. We're selling. You know, and of course there's a lot of blame to go around. Coaching, Garth Snow, and listen, I've been a big proponent of Garth Snow, but it's, you know, it's very disappointing that he didn't put, in my opinion, his money where his mouth was. You know, for all the talk when he made, he's got to know that he needs a defenseman, and he did know. Darren Dreger reported he was looking for a top-pairing defenseman, which in my opinion is a cop-out, because there's about 28 teams that are looking for a top-pairing defenseman. You're not just going to find one to trade for. You got to go out and make a risk. You got to go out and take a risky player. Is that, you know, was that Ladislav Smid? Was that Tim Gleason? Are those guys that would have been better in this situation than they were in their other situation? Gleason looks good in Toronto. Smid, I don't know too much what he's doing with Calgary. I mean, he looked good to me the other night when we played, but, you know, sometimes you have to bite the bullet. Smid was making $3.5 million. Gleason's making $4 million. They had multiple years left on their contracts, and that is why, you know, guys like that were not here. So that's why I say the song remains the same, because for all the talk about, you know, mediocrity not being acceptable anymore, they don't seem to want to pay to get out of mediocrity. And if you're not going to want to pay, then you're gonna have to expect this. So I thought it was a cop out a little bit on Snow's part to make the Vanek trade and let it stand on its own and let this team flounder. You know, not make a coaching change, not go out and get a defenseman. You know, was looking for a bargain deal on a goaltender that never came. You know, even if it was Brian Elliott, and the asking price there was supposedly a third round. And, you know, there was just never any, you know, we heard all this talk about, oh, Snow's really looking at goaltending. Snow's really looking for a top-pairing defenseman. To me, it was all a cop-out, because, you know, I think you could have gone out and got something at a decent price, or gone out and gotten a guy that maybe needed a change of scenery. Teams do this all the time. The Toronto Maple Leafs were struggling. The Toronto Maple Leafs were plummeting down to earth towards 500 and went and made a couple of shrewd deals. They traded a guy in John Michael Lyles for a guy who was struggling in Carolina, and guess what? He stepped up and he's done pretty well for the Maple Leafs, and the Maple Leafs ended up winning some games before the Olympic break started. You know, so it's frustrating that there was no, in my opinion, there was no foresight into, no out of the box thinking, no looking at the league and saying, what guy is a change of scenery guy that I can take and put in a good situation on this blue line. And now you're seeing, you know, with Hamonic out and Vishnowsky not looking himself, now you're seeing really where a lot of problems lie for this team.
Yeah. It's not going to get any better.
And I don't think, yeah, but I mean, Griffin Reinhardt's not going to step in here and be the next coming of Jesus Christ, you know. It's just not going to happen. So this team needed to add somebody under contract. They still need to add somebody on the contract, be it through free agency or trade. Are they going to? I mean, this defense needs a lot of work.
Now let me, yeah, I mean, that goes without saying. But I got to get back on the Vanek thing.
Go ahead.
Because frankly, this is really the entire show right here, is Vanek. And however long it takes for us to talk about Vanek and hash it out, that's however long this show's going to be. And there's not much to say about it. Well, we didn't want it to appear for 2 weeks, especially when this happened, you know, like 2 days after I was out of town for a week.
Right.
There was no way of doing a show.
No, especially not when I was down and out with the flu.
Now, I will say this. You know, the word is that the Islanders offered Thomas Vanek a very lucrative contract. 7 years, $50 million sounds like the ballpark. That's quite lucrative.
Very lucrative.
But here's the problem. That's the same contract he signed as a restricted free agent.
Right.
So if you believed that you were going to blow him away by offering him the same contract he's already signed, you are wrong.
Well,
And
remember,
the fact that they offered that deal, he wasn't willing to commit to that deal, and instead of going back and saying, you know what, all right, you turn that down, we're going to work on getting you a new offer. No, it went to, okay, well, we got to trade
yeah.
him.
Well,
Okay, so that means that all this nonsense about we will not be outbid, we're going to make sure he gets the top deal, that's all a bunch of crap. Because as soon as he turned down the contract that he has already signed when he's due to make a pay raise, because that's what happens when you become an unrestricted free agent,
Right.
unless your career tanks, which his hasn't.
no, his is kind of gotten rejuvenated.
When that happens, and they went from we're not going to be outbid to we're going to offer him the same contract he already has to, oh, that's not good enough, all right, we got to trade him then.
Well,
means that they were not willing to negotiate any higher than the contract that they offered him, and it sounds to me like that contract was a one and done. And if you're really serious about re-signing this guy, forget about the stupid draft pick. Just
Well,
forget about the draft pick. Forget about Molson, because Molson in Buffalo right now is showing the world how he really is without John Tavares. So let's just put that on the table. Let him go make his money elsewhere. It's better spent not here. Moving forward from that, you don't need another freaking draft pick. But somehow, this team keeps finding themselves in the basement of the NHL. Drafting picks that aren't going to make an effect on this team for the next 4 years doesn't address the need of getting them out of the basement. Going out and getting veteran players and signing veteran free agents and hanging on to these guys, that's what's going to bring them out of the basement now. And because you made the playoffs last year and because you said the rebuild is done, then you cannot keep drafting in the top 5. With that said, you are not going to be able to outbid anybody for Thomas Vanek if you don't have the ability to offer that max contract. And all indications are he likes it here. He wants to do what's best with his family. He does want to test. He is willing to sign here. But let's be real. This guy wants the cold, hard cash.
he was honest about it. That's what he said. He said term and money is what I'm looking
if term and money is what he wants, then he will sign here. Because he has chemistry with Tavares, he has chemistry with Opozo, he likes the franchise, and we can offer him everything that every other team, the 20 other offers he gets on July 1st, we by default beat every single one of them. So if you let him go, if you trade him, you lose that edge.
Right. Well, I mean, like you said, all indications are in the ballpark was of that similar contract. It could be more. It doesn't sound like it was less. You know, I mean, some people hear that it's 7 years. Some people hear that they did offer the 8 years. Some people hear that they may have gone up to maybe 7.5. We don't know. You know, so you use the benchmark of the current contract that he has and figure it's going to need to be at least 7.5 a year. You know, regardless, you know, here's the problem. Here's part of the problem. You see, you know, and this is what we've been saying all along. Is any player worth the contract like this? Is any player not Ovechkin worth the contract like this? No, of course not. The reason Thomas Vanek is thanks to the Edmonton Oilers for signing him to that ridiculous, stupid RFA offer sheet that they signed him to, which was the 7-year, $50 million a year offer. If I'm Thomas Vanek and I'm his agent, and his agent really, if I'm his agent, I'm saying somebody 7 years ago thought Thomas Vanek was worth this. And while he's had some injury problems and this and that, he's always, you know, produced at a consistent level. You know, you could always rely on him for around 70 points. And he complements them well. We saw it back when Buffalo had Briere and Drury and guys like that and Campbell. We see it now that he plays with Tavares and Oposo. This is a guy who can put up points. He can find good players if he's playing with the right players. Didn't always have those right years. So the market dictates that a guy like this is going to get a contract like that. It's the same thing we've been talking about. It's the Brian Campbell contract for the Blackhawks. It's the Parise contract for the Minnesota Wild. It's a contract that, no, a player is not worth, but because of who the player is and what they were making and the fact that it's the top free agent. I mean, you have to think about Thomas Vanek. I mean, you have Parise last year. But aside from that, when was the last time that a dynamic scorer like this was on the market? Was it Marian Hossa? And there's another example of a bad contract, although his dollar value was very good. The years were terrible, but anyway, so you have to look at the situation and you have to understand that going with the status quo and what he has now, you're right, is not going to cut it. You got to offer that extra money. You got to offer that other that if.
Oh, well, go ahead. Finish what you were going to say, because I think that we're probably about to talk about the same thing.
Yeah, we haven't heard whether they front-loaded the contract or not. So, in fairness to the Islanders, we'll assume that it was, a deal that made sense. We'll assume that it was in the range that it was a good start.
To throw nervous because they are so quick to abandon the ship, it means that contract that they offered was the most they were willing to offer, and it's a tip. It just stinks of Charles Wong and typical New York Islander nonsense of this is the one contract we're going to offer, it's the money we want, it's the years we want, it's the terms that we want, either take it or leave it, and that's it.
You
take the advantage away from you when you put yourself on an even par with everybody else. When you trade him elsewhere, give somebody else the opportunity to offer him more money over more years, and you just even the playing field. When you are this team, given this situation right now, that is not a luxury that you have. You are not the Blackhawks. You are not the Rangers. You are not the Bruins. You are not the Canadians.
Yeah.
You do not have the luxury to put yourself on par with everybody else. You need every advantage that comes to you. You have the #1 free agent on the market. So hang on to him. Give yourself, as you have said, the extra 20 games to play with Tavares, the extra 20 games to play with Opozo. Give yourself another 3 or 4 months to try and negotiate with him. And then, in the week leading up to free agency, when he doesn't, get on the phone with Minnesota, because we know that's where he's going to go. Whatever. But this team, if you are serious about the rebuild being done, means we don't need these stupid draft picks anymore. But they are so afraid about losing the picks, because what this tells me, this was never a rebuild. This was about not spending money. And they hid it as a rebuild. It's what we have been afraid of for years. And because this is happening, in my opinion, this only has validated every fear that we have had, that this was never about rebuilding. It was about spending cheaply, and we got lucky because we drafted John Tavares.
Yeah, well,
because had we not drafted him, we would have had Hedman, who does next to nothing, Duchesne, who does next to nothing, certainly not worth where they were picked, in my opinion, and we wouldn't have made the playoffs last year, and God knows we might have even drafted, we would have been worse than we already are.
Well,
and we would have never gone to the playoffs. We would have never had a Thomas Vanek here.
The thing that alarms me is the fact that in order to make this trade, the Islanders let Buffalo take on some of the salary. Buffalo's salary. That told me a big part of the story that I was just hoping was maybe just for this season. And I know people downplayed it and said it's not that big of a deal. But when you're dealing with the New York Islanders and where they've come from and historically the way that they've acted, it is a big deal because, you like to think that it's somebody going for the home run play, and then you dig down into the details, and it was, all about, oh, well, it's a conditional first-round pick, or, oh, it's which is a good move because you never know how these things work out. But then you find out, well, Buffalo retained some salary so that it matched Molson's. And then you find out, well, so they didn't add anything. They didn't add any salary. When you do that, you think, oh, good, they're adding salary this year. They're actually going for it. They're actually trying to make changes. To me, when I saw that, forget about the picks. It was more of the same. It was, okay, we'll take a player, but you're going to pick up some of the salary for us. And that happens in a lot of trades, but, that was a frustrating thing to me. That was a detail that I did not like because it almost seemed like it was a foreshadowing. I don't agree with the whole one-and-done contract offer, which is certainly what this looks like. Because for weeks and months we heard they haven't talked. Vanix, they've agreed to not talk contract right away until this, that, the other thing. Start talking contract. We hear that they've talked a little bit. They've only been exploratory. Blah 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 blah. All of a sudden, we hear the word that comes out that Thomas Vanek turned down the Islanders' contract offer, and it was 2 weeks prior to the story being published. So that tells me that they talked. An offer was submitted, and then all of a sudden, for two weeks, nothing happened. And that is definitely what bothers me, because you're right. It gives the impression that the Islanders still think that they can get guys on their own terms.
Right.
And they absolutely cannot. And anybody who's in business and anybody who's taking a negotiating class knows that this is a process. This is not I'll throw an offer out there, you counter, and then we walk away from the table. That's not good negotiating. You start at a low number, understanding what number you think is ideal. You try and look at market value. You try and understand where he's going to come from. And obviously you want to get the lower number, and that's fine. That's good negotiating skills, but most negotiations will get towards the middle ground. That's just human nature. It's not always in the best interest for both parties. And certainly for Vanek, especially when it comes to any professional athlete, it's not in the best interest to him to give up all that and find a 50-50 split. He wants to get closer to the $8 million figure for sure. The Islanders want to get closer to the 7. I think that it was a good start, and I thought it was a valiant effort, but I was upset to hear that, yes, they will be trading Thomas Vanek. When people asked me my opinions on it, I always thought that Thomas Vanek was going to go to unrestricted free agency. I think that he would be crazy not to go to unrestricted free agency, especially over a contract similar to the one that he has now, when you know that somebody's going to offer him that 7 years and closer to that $8 million a year.
Right.
And by the way, front load the heck out of it.
Right.
Which is very important when you have 3 kids and a wife and whatever else.
Sure.
So to me, I always thought that they would try to negotiate through the end of the year, similar to the way they did with Mark Streit, and then when they couldn't come to an agreement, if they couldn't come to an agreement, trade him at the, like you said, at the draft or whatever, the days leading up to free agency, get their 3rd round pick, be done with it. The thing for me is, I crazy as it sounds, Vanek sounds very open to just going where the money and the term is. If the Islanders come to their senses, or maybe the Islanders are thinking, well, we'll think about a better offer for him, but we're not going to offer it now. We'll get something for him and try and bring him back in the offseason, which would be a genius plan, honestly. You're getting some assets for him now, and then he ends up coming back. I don't know if the Islanders are smart enough to hatch a plan like that.
No,
I
really
don't think so.
And, the other...
And it doesn't happen as often as people talk about, well, he'll come back, we'll have assets, we'll have that. I've only seen... And that's the only time I can remember it happening in recent memory.
Yeah. The only guy for picks to recoup what they lost in trading Molson away and whatever would be if Vanek's people went back and said this offer is not good enough, and the Islanders offered something else, and Vanek's people said this offer is not good enough, and the Islanders came out and said, okay, you know what? You're important to this franchise. You're important in the rebuild, or in the the reboot of the franchise. We're going to Brooklyn in a year and a half. You have the chemistry with John. We think we can $8 million a year, front-loaded. And if he would have... I will not sign that contract, then, okay, you want to move him because he has no intention on coming back, then fine. But show me that you did everything in your power to try, not just give this one and done that we have seen so frequently out of them.
And I see a lot of the comments from people saying, well, no player is worth that, especially for the team and this and that. No, it doesn't. But it comes a point in time where you have to realize that a team needs to do something out of the ordinary for themselves, needs to show the extra step, needs to show the effort, and needs that contract. The Chicago Blackhawks needed to sign those terrible contracts to Campbell and Hossa because of a statement at the time. They were trying to show the hockey world that they were back. They went through dark times where their games weren't even televised. and fans couldn't watch them, and it was just constant problems. Eric Daze kept getting hurt. He was their big star. So they traded Tony Amani. I mean, this was a team that was just going nowhere fast
And
struggled for so much, and it even had the problems, and yeah, they had to deconstruct the team because of all the bad contracts that they signed, and some of it was because of Talon's own doing, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, teams do this all the time. They sign these players to terrible contracts. Pittsburgh Penguins signed Paul Martin to an absolutely terrible deal. They signed Zbigniew Mikulik to a terrible deal. He's back in Phoenix. But why did they do it? Because they were the Pittsburgh Penguins, because they had the best player in hockey, and because they knew that in order to show people that they were serious, they needed to go out and get the top defenseman on the market. They needed to go out and and get help for their superstar. And these contracts are terrible. But if you want to add people in free agency, you're going to have to give out a bad contract. Yes. And it just happens. It's the nature of sports. If people complain that they didn't do this, they didn't do that, and then people look at the price and go, "That's a terrible contract. I wouldn't have wanted them to give that anyway." And I understand the thinking, but at some point we have to think like a major league franchise. At some point we have to think about a franchise that's trying to take the next step. And here, in my opinion, they had the chance to do that, and they took a baby step in that direction by giving big money, $50 million. If you're assuming it's the similar contract, $50 million over 7 years is nothing to sneeze at for the New York Islanders. Absolutely not. It is nothing to sneeze at. $7.2 million a year, great. You got to work from that base, though. That's a good first offer.
Yes.
We'll give you the same thing that you're making now. Stay here, 7 years. Okay, that's not good enough. Well, what are you looking for? Okay, well, let's see what we can do here, this and that and the other thing. And then you work on other things, the incentives and trade clauses, the incentives meaning signing bonus in the front.
None of that ever happened.
And it seems like none of that ever happened. We don't know. I'm sure the story will come out over the month in the past, and we'll hear about this, that, the other thing. Aside from a couple of nice stories about Alan Walsh saying, well, he pushed hard for Paul Martin and this and that, and we hear about, well, they offered $6 million a year to Dan Hamhuis, and he wanted to go back home to Vancouver, and well, they offered the money to Ehrhoff and things like that. Level-loaded contracts.
Backloaded the contract to
Ehrhoff. Backloaded contracts are not going to cut it. And listen, the agent's going to appreciate that, because at the end of the day, they'll look and say, well, everybody will say, well, $36 million over 6 years is great for Christian Ehrhoff. Yeah, the Islanders were looking at $6 million a year. At the end of the day, though, it's not going to cut it if you're trying to sign these guys. These are the contracts that they're getting. And in my opinion, the Islanders are at that point in time where they need to prove to John Tavares, they need to prove to their fan base that they are trying to build a winning team, and they need to sign one of those contracts. I'm tired of hearing about, well, no player is worth this. Well, I wouldn't want to give Thomas Vanek that because it's going to tie us down until he's 38 and he already can't stay healthy. I'm tired and sick and tired of hearing all that from fans, from media members, from bloggers. I'm tired of the apologies. There comes a point in time where you have to look at the picture of the league and see what other teams are doing and say, no, you know what, this isn't okay anymore. This is not acceptable anymore. And in my opinion, I walked into this fully expecting and fully prepared and very accepting of the fact that this was going to be one of those bad contracts. But you know what? I didn't care. I didn't care because it meant that we would have had a first line for the next decade. I didn't care because it would have meant that we were telling that a player that we brought in was willing to stay here and basically send a shock around the hockey world that New York go to. John Tavares is a player that players want to play for, and that's not happening right here.
Those are older players. Ability to rather have 7 games. Let's go back. I said I would rather have 70 games to negotiate. All right, so you offer a one-done contract and break up the best line in hockey for the last 2 months.
This was the big talking point.
This is the best line.
We bring players in, and when they play with us for a while, they come to love it, and we
This is the best line that this team has had in 25 years. Easily. This is easily the best line this team has had in 25 years. Or his normal nonsense and saying, backload it, these are my terms, take it or leave it.
That's what my fear is.
And
I suspect.
Sorry, history repeats itself. Sorry to be a cynic.
Listen, and listen, we're not. That stuff is proprietary. We're not supposed to know as fans. We're not supposed to know the details of who's backloading contracts. But stuff leaks all the time. And when this stuff leaks, because you know it will at some point, it's going to leak. I have a feeling we're going to be very upset to hear that the history repeats itself. You just said it. Season, by the way, because not only now you're not moving Reinstrom to center to the wing. You've already made it clear that you see him as a center. He's a natural fit for the second line center spot. So who's taking this wing spot? You refuse to play Michael Grabner, and of course a hat trick when you put a Team Austria jersey on. But you know, you're not giving him the time.
Maybe
there's no replacement in the offseason unless you want to go out and sign Ales Hemsky as you know, an injury 1 year prove it contract again, and then
just like all the other prove it contracts that
repeat. Exactly.
Just like we.
So what are you gonna do? So who's the replacement?
And
by the way, what are you gonna do then to replace that, and then go out and get the defense and goaltending that you need? Now you have another hole that you're gonna have to fill.
The lather, rinse, repeat constantly got us a top 5 pick, which means that if they do that, then there is zero interest in making the playoffs. And I would charge the podium at a press conference if they said, well, you know, we're trying to get better and we're trying to make the playoffs and try to win a Stanley Cup. I would charge the damn podium.
That's what's frustrating to me, because now you look at it.
No, because there's no way that you want to do that.
Now that I look
because
at it,
you're just doing the same garbage that has just caused this chaos that is the last 10 years of this franchise.
And this is my big fear right now. Listen, it's entirely possible they could end up moving Thomas Vanek, only because his name isn't fresh in my mind. Let's just say, for example, you trade him to St. Louis and you're bringing back Stewart. Yeah, he struggled, but you know he's a guy that maybe you could try on the first line type of thing. You know, the Islanders are looking for, you know, now we'll get to this part of it. You know, as McKenzie reported, they're looking for 3 pieces. They're looking for a first-round pick, they're looking for a prospect, and they're looking for a young player. I think that they can get that from somebody, a team desperate to make noise. Again, similar to the Islanders, the way that the Islanders should be, a team looking to make noise, looking to get into the playoffs type of thing, looking to shore up their offense, LA, you know, something like that. Maybe even like a Colorado type of thing that's like, okay, we need to do something extravagant to prove to our fans that this isn't just a fluke thing, that we're actually making the playoffs. This is going to happen. A Columbus type of thing. Who knows, you know? You know, a place where he probably won't stay, but they'll be like, you know what, we've sucked for so long that this is fine. We can give up these assets. And maybe that's where they're going to start to look and say, okay, well, now we have a young player. Let's see how he works on the top line. But as of right now, there is not one winger in this organization that can step into that spot.
Well, maybe we're waiting for John Persson out of Bridgeport.
You know,
I mean, look, there's no wingers. Yeah. Anders Lee, maybe. But you're gonna hang your hat on a 20-year-old?
Well, this is what I'm saying. I don't think these guys are first liners.
No!
These are good role players, and this team has a lot of those, and that's what scares me. You're gonna if Thomas Vanek walks and you don't bring him back in the offseason or make a better effort, you know, everybody else has signed. Jason Palmerville is signed. Phil Kessel is signed. Everybody has a contract. Like I said, unless you want to go after the Ales Hemskys of the world.
And they might. They might.
I don't see this ending very well.
They might. Because then they don't have to get locked into something.
With this team, history repeats itself. Doesn't want to spend a lot of money. If they have one and they go out and get a defenseman, well, now you got a hole up on the top line. Well, now you still have a hole in goal. You know, and that's what scares me.
And it goes back to stop focusing so much on trading Vanek and start focusing on trading Nielsen. Because you are log-jammed at center right now.
You know, I think...
Move him.
It's going to be, and it's tough. It's tough to just say move him, and I understand why people are saying, well, I wouldn't do it. He's playing the best he is playing the best he is. But if you're not moving Reinstrom to wing, which means he cannot play on that top line, then you need to figure out how you can get somebody who is a winger by using the other assets that you have. Center is a position of strength, in my opinion. I agree with you. You can get that defenseman that you're looking for. You can get that winger that you're looking for. I think if you end up moving a guy like a Nielsen, it's tough. I understand it's tough to move a guy like him, but I agree with you. You know, that's the type of thing that you have to look at. That's the type of thing that the New York Islanders have to look at. You look at the model. Nashville does this a lot. Nashville signs guys, and then they look at what their strength is, and they go, you know something? We're a budget team. We're gonna sign this guy, you know, Weber. We're gonna sign this guy, but we're gonna sign this guy as a free agent type of thing, and it's never the top names. It's the Victor Stahlbergs of the world. You know, they're good at signing college guys. They're good at drafting.
And they built from the net out.
And that's correct. They built from the net out. Now we'll see what happens with Rene as we move forward, because it's a mess this year with him. But at the same time, this is a team that they make trades and people go, "Wow, they traded who? They sent him away?" Oh, but they looked at a position and they filled the position from strength to build the weakness. They did not like the fact that they were paying close to $3 million a year for Kevin Kline, who's been a great defenseman for them, but they got a lot of guys like that. They felt they needed some more offense. They obviously don't have the offense up front, but they know that they can create the offense from the back end and give Weber some help back there. So what do? They go out and get an offensive defenseman and Michael Del Zotto for him. That's a team that recognizes where they have a position of strength, where they have a position of weakness, and tries to find that middle ground and how can we better make this trade. They needed a big, lumbering center, and they went out and got Paul Gaustad and stuff like that. They traded away their draft pick. They've struggled the last couple of years, and they're struggling again this year, but, this is a team that has a good model of, we're a budget team, but we'll go out and make the moves that we have to. We need a gritty guy. Okay, let's splurge on a 4-year contract for Eric Nystrom, and guarantee you Eric Nystrom won't see the end of that contract in Nashville.
No.
Because they'll end up moving him for some other position of weakness. That's how they operate. Is it the best way to operate? No, but it's the way to operate if you're going to be a budget team. The Islanders, in theory, should not be a budget team within the next 2 years. If, all this talk of being big time and going to Brooklyn and stuff dictates that they should not be operating at a cap floor in 2 years. Especially when
right
they're paying
now,
nothing to be moving to that building.
Right. If I'm the Islanders, my focus right now is trade Nielsen, because you've got Tavares, Strome, Nelson, Cizikas. Those are your 4 long-term centers. You cannot tell me that is not your long-term goal. It has to be. And all 4 of them can play the position. So that means that Nielsen is left out. So Nielsen's under contract. You move him for a defenseman under contract. Bring him back. Focus on free agency in July, whether it's Hiller or Halak or whoever, Ryan Miller. You focus on that when you get to July. You address you address defense now.
You need to.
You clear the logjam at center. You give guys like Nelson, who for some reason, Flounder doesn't understand that when the kid's playing well, you don't sit him. I mean, he's done that less lately, but give the kid ice time. Yeah. Strome's going to come back. We saw how Strome was coming into his own, and he was putting shots on net, and he was moving the puck well, and he was throwing the body around, and he was playing chippy, because he doesn't take anybody's crap. I mean, the kid's got a set for, a 19, 20-year-old, and that impresses me. So, frankly, give them the ice time, move Nielsen for the defenseman, focus on goaltending in July, and make the priority. As soon as you get the defenseman after you unload Nielsen, put the focus on Vanek. Don't trade him. Hang on to him, work on him, go back to the table, give him a market contract, and when he rejects it, then you can say, you know what, we did everything that we could. We're going to lose a draft pick here, but you know what, we're doing everything that we can.
Listen, if they're insistent on trading Vanek, they can do it in a way that won't make it hurt as much. Somebody brought it up last week, or 2 weeks ago, and we kind of looked at each other and kind of were like, where is that coming from? But it's not. Since then, I've heard it, okay, and I've seen it, and I've seen his name in there. Somebody brought up Alex Edler on Vancouver, and I did not realize. First of all, Vancouver's a mess. They can barely hold on to the final playoff spot in the West. John Tortorella has. I don't know what he's done with that team. The Sedins are on pace for 55-point seasons. Tortorella's too busy charging opposing locker rooms, and Alex Edler is having a god-awful season. He's got a 6-year contract that he's about to start, and at a not cheap price, but it sounds like Vancouver's really open to moving this guy away. And it sounds like that they have interest in Vanek. I saw somebody make a mention of, take Vanek and try and work some things and make it a bigger trade. And I'm sitting there going, that would be something that to me would lessen the blow. It would make more sense. Yes, Edler has a bad contract, but he'd be a guy that I'd be interested in looking to get. Vancouver needs a center. Maybe that's the answer for them. Maybe Franz Nielsen's the answer for them. If you do something that lessens the blow and shows that you're trying to address the other things, you can replace the Nielsen. He's having a great year this year, but let's just say on average he gets 50 points because that's what he's done the last few years. You can, in my opinion, replace that. As Strome comes along, he'll replace that. He'll exceed that. That'll take a few years, but he'll help take away some of the blow immediately next year. You can replace the rest of the points or even those 50 points by getting somebody in free agency. And there are guys that are going to be out there. There are guys that you can go out.
And this is his
highest
value.
You sign a Mike Conley, and there's your 50 points. There's your 45
this
points.
This is his highest value.
Right. So
you're never going to get what you're going to get for him right now.
I'm not just trading him for picks, and that's my fear because that's what the Islanders do. No, think outside the box. You go to Vancouver and say you need a center. Especially now, Kessler looks like he may have broken his hand. Who knows? In the Olympics, Booth is not good, and this. I look at that and I go, you need a center. You're looking to move Edler here. How about this deal? And you work from there. And then you're taking a guy who has been good for you, and yeah, it's hurting you this year, but that's fine because now for the next 6 years you're going to have a replacement, a guy who's better than Andrew McDonald. Okay, and a guy who can move the puck and this and that. That's the type of deal that this team would need to look at. And we kind of looked at each other last week when somebody brought up his name, but it turns out he is available. They are, they do have him on the market. They are thinking about moving him. And I think that's the kind of thing. Yeah, it's a bad contract, but that's what scares me. It's front loaded, this and that. Are they going? That's very telling to me. I hear these guys' names and we see the teams, the Islanders. Incorporated with a lot of them, the Stewarts, the Browns, but we never see any action. And the one time we finally saw action was Vanek. And, oh, by the way, Buffalo picked up $1.5 million of his salary.
To us, we have the cap changing even with the move, and if we trade him, he's gone. No way he's signing here.
Thank you. And that's the point that is lost on a lot of our media friends, if you will. And it's the thing that I'll vehemently disagree with all of them. And I understand where they're coming from when they say, well, he's not worth it, no player is worth it, this, that, the other thing. This is professional sports. Nobody is worth any of the contracts that they're on right now.
No, see, Sabathia is not worth nearly $30 million a year.
Nobody is worth the contract that they were on. So get that out of your head, first of all, and then look at what the market professional sports is. Look at where the Islanders are. As MW says, to the New York Islanders, it's important. Listen, Curtis Granderson is not worth the contract that he got from the New York Mets, but he's damn well worth it to the New York Mets because of the position that they were in, because of the statement that they needed to make. And I thought that was a phenomenal. I'm a Yankees fan, but I thought that was a phenomenal signing for the New York Mets. The Bartolo Colon signing was a phenomenal signing for the New York Mets because they are trying to show their fan base, yes, we lost Matt Harvey. Yes, this is going on. Yes, we've had some bad finishes, but we are trying to turn the corner. We've identified veterans that we think are part of the solution. And that's where we're going forward. So the New York Islanders have failed to do that to this point.
So you mean that a team, just let me get this straight, a team geographically attached to Long Island with a New York name with blue and orange uniforms actually went out and really tried and addressed something? And it's the Mets. Yes. It's the freaking Mets.
And that's
if you would have told me that a New York team geographically attached to Long Island with blue and orange uniforms would have gone out and made a signing that really was valuable to their fans and their team, do you think I would have ever said it was the basement-dwelling Mets? No, I would have said it's the playoff caliber New York Islanders. And that's what's scary to me. And part of this is the way that this team does evaluate their free agents. Mason Raymond is out on the market. I said go out and get Mason Raymond. That's a guy the Islanders should target. Who do we go get? Pierre-Marc Bouchard. And oh, by the way, paid him more money than you would have paid Mason Raymond.
Mason Raymond was a camp invite. The guy that I kept talking about was Tom Gilbert, if you remember, on defense. And he's doing some good things for Florida, by the way. Those are the things to me that frustrate. When we had this was a good year to bring in a lot of those camp invites. Last time we did that was a few years ago. Oh, don't worry though, we did bring in Radek Martinek. We forget.
Yeah, huh?
But a few years ago we bring in Steve Staios, and it's like, again with the older guys, and that's a good guy to have around. Yeah.
Yeah,
But they should have added another younger defenseman.
Rolston, Rafalski, like.
Yeah.
No.
It's those kinds of guys, and to me, that's the frustrating thing. I'm all for adding older players. I screamed my head off here to the point where people were disgusting about it. I actually went back to read what I was saying the other day about Jaromir Jagr in the offseason, and that's the one that really didn't sit well with me. That they never were interested. They never really talked to him because they didn't want to pay him the $4 million. That one really annoyed me because that's the type of player that I think that this team needed. A guy with experience, a guy who can still hold the puck. And now we're looking at this situation, and they don't go after veterans like that, and that upsets me. Because they were doing it a few years ago when they were signing the Billy Guerins of the world. It's like this team can never figure out the right time to do it. They probably shouldn't have signed all those free agents back then. I understood what they were trying to do. They were trying to save face. But you look back hindsight, yeah, they probably shouldn't have done that. They probably should have just started the rebuild right then and there. But here we are. And the Vanek thing is it's a big point of contention among a lot of people, and a lot of people my fear, and from what I'm seeing from a lot of people, is there's no understanding of, as MW pointed out, what this means to the New York Islanders and why it's important that they have to pull out all the stops. It's not necessary for a team to report to their fan base every term and every contract negotiation that they have. But this stuff leaks out. And right now the only information that we have is they've used the $750 as a base. Could be more, could be less. I'd be very upset and honestly very surprised if it was less. So the only thing we have to work on is that it was a base. Maybe we're sitting here and the New York Islanders did offer 8x60 and we don't even know it. I find that highly unlikely, but some people think that it could be possible. Maybe it'll come out, maybe it won't. So, to me, as MW said, Thomas Vanek to the New York Islanders, to us, is worth $8 million a year just because of your star player, but what he means, the message that it sends to the rest of the hockey world. And that's a message. Listen, everybody and their uncle laughed. The Chicago Blackhawks signed Campbell for what? And then what happened? Every free agent proceeded to get drawn to that team because they had Taves, they had Kane, they were signing the big names. And like you said, they have 2 cups to show for that.
It's a good model to follow.
It's a very good model to follow.
But you also have to be willing to do it. And right now, the ownership of this team...
It doesn't look like it's committed yet. And,
no.
and that's upsetting because, comments, like you said, talk is cheap, but to think that in professional sports, when a team makes comments, and sees the situation to improve themselves, even the New York Yankees, who are pinching pennies, for the last couple of years, blew their rule that they've worked so hard for the last 3 years. They blew their own rule to go and sign the top pitcher, perceived, on the market, knowing that this was a hole that they needed. The New York Islanders went and made a trade for the top guy on the trade market, the top free agent to be, standing in front of a microphone saying that mediocrity will no longer be accepted. And then what happened? The team lost whatever it was. They went on a 2-17 run. The coach remained. No other trades happened. The only thing that happened was Ryan Strome came up and Pierre-Marc Bouchard went down. What happened to mediocrity is not acceptable. What happened? Where did we go wrong? What went wrong? What's going on? And that, to me, is a very upsetting part because now it puts us back in a situation where here we are. We're in the Olympic break right now, but we'll come back. There'll be 10 days before a trade deadline, and we're going to be sitting here going, so are we rebuilding again? So what are we going to do this? So what are we going to do to do that? And here we are wondering about what happened to mediocrity not being acceptable. Just 4 months after it wasn't acceptable. If it was said that it wasn't acceptable. And I know talk is cheap, but, this team does an awful lot of talking. They don't say much, usually, but when they do this, they say an awful lot. Snow doesn't say much to the media, but he was very vocal about, re-signing players. And like you said, Darren Drager reported that he talked to Snow, and Snow said, You know, we're going to offer him the top deal. We can offer him the deal. We got the cap space. We got the this. For an organization that hasn't said much over the last several years, Snow certainly said a lot in regards to Thomas Vanek. And Thomas Vanek has laid it all out on the line. I would like to test free agency, but listen, let's be real. I'm looking for term and money. Give him term, give him money.
MW in the chat room says if they offered him 8 years, you know without question that would have leaked. Twitter question at Shot86. How does Wong just not want to spend money but says he's committed to winning? You have to overspend or outbid to get what your team needs.
This is true, yes.
Yeah, well, no kidding. But he's also not going to sit there and say, well, I'm willing to spend what I'm willing to spend, and if we stink, we stink. So of course he's going to stand there and say he's committed to winning. What is he going to do? Sit there and say, well, it is what it is?
Actions speak louder than words, and the actions show that they have not fully committed themselves to that winning yet. And
Correct.
It's disappointing because, like you said, you know, yes, last year was a short year, but you look at things, you think it's going up, and it's a step back. Now, you can mitigate that, like we said, make some, you know, some of these moves that we've talked about or whatever, and yeah, you can get some things back. You can get some solid pieces if you move Vanek, if you're patient enough. Yeah, fine, whatever. You know, lessen the blow. Show something forward thinking. Because without showing that forward thinking by using your two big assets, and let's see, I know we've bashed Andrew McDonald on this show many times, and many fans are, I mean, his price range of looking for $5 million a year and him turning down
he
his
did turn
4
down,
times
yes.
$60 million a year, that, to me, is a very fair deal to a guy like that. I have no problem
It's
letting
almost
him
too
go.
much money.
I have no. I'm surprised that they offered that much, considering it sounded like they were more in the 3 range, but they went up to 4, which kind of, you know, would like to think you can give hope that maybe they did go up to 7.5 on Vanek. I have no idea, but I look at that and I go, okay, this is a guy though that's got a lot of value. They've gotten a lot of calls on him. They've already turned down a really good offer. You know, presumably from maybe it was Washington for Newverth, who knows? But you know, they've already turned down a good offer for him, and the offers are only going to get better as you get closer. And they know that, you know, and teams want this guy. This, you know, he's blocking a lot of shots. We've seen the warts, probably because he's playing 4 minutes a game more than he probably should be. But you know, this is still a guy who I think is going to be a top 4 defenseman on someone, and where his warts won't be as exposed, and he'll be good. So he's got a lot of value, you know. So when I look at that, you know, you maximize this, you get some good pieces in return, you lessen the blow, and it's like, okay, you know, this makes sense now. Show something forward. Don't just keep losing players. It's kind of funny that the Islanders do have trouble re-signing their own free agents to be. You know, it is kind of funny that, you know, aside from the old guys like Nabokov that don't have very big market, you know, or guys like Vishnevsky, you know, it is kind of funny that this team has really not re-signed one of their own unrestricted free agents. Forget about the restricted guys; those are easy. But you know, you got to show some thinking outside the box. You're losing Andrew McDonald. Assuming you're losing Vanek, if you're really insistent on trading these guys, you got to make it worth your while. You got to get some good pieces back, and then you know what you do. If you trade Vanek, you go hard after him in the offseason again, saying, "Listen, we did trade you, but we want you. We want another shot at this. Here's a revised offer," type of thing. I'm fine with that.
Here's the top offer.
And they move him for something that helps and something that's making sense. Or if they made other moves that thought outside the box, like we talked about, a Nielsen move would be thinking outside the box. You know, to me, that's where there's a lack of here. It's thinking that you've drafted well enough. When you've drafted some real solid players, you know, like a Person and that may develop into something, they may not develop into something, but you look at them on the surface, and if anything, the defense are really good prospects in defense now. You can see that already. Some of them are a few years off,
yeah,
but they've done better with the defensemen than they have with the forwards. And you look at some of these guys that goes, well, Lee may be a good checking line guy, and in person maybe a guy who can put up some decent points and fill in on a second line, but is he really? It doesn't look like it right now. It really doesn't look like it. So if you can go out and get some good pieces that are closer to being ready than some of these guys, or at least have a higher ceiling, then you're in good shape, because you go, okay, now out, you're going to go out and get your first and second round pick back. What does that mean to me? It means nothing. It means we're going to draft somebody this summer or next summer who's another 3 to 4 years away from really making an impact.
Right.
No, this team needs to get somebody who can step in now. It could be like a guy like a Jake Gardner or something like that. We've talked about him.
If
His
you're
name's
gonna,
been-
yeah.
It could be somebody. They need somebody who can step in now and see what we have. We need something tangible. A draft pick to me is not tangible at this state. Drafting a name in June is not going to be tangible to me for another 3 years.
No, frankly, I'd rather go out and make the trade now and go out and get one of these guys and have the Islanders say, you know what? Yeah, we're out of it. But we made a trade because we're starting to think about how we're going to build in the summer and how we can be competitive next season, our last year in Nassau Coliseum.
See, to me, the Vanek trade was an outside-the-box thing.
I thought it was, yeah.
So they're capable of it.
They're capable of it, but they are not capable of getting out of their comfort zone.
No,
that's the
what scares
problem.
me. That's what scares me.
And if you're going to trade him, for the love of God, don't trade him to Minnesota.
You know.
And you know what? That scares me because I can see them doing it.
Then you're gonna get it. You gotta
get something big.
Charlie Coyle, something. You gotta get something good, something young. Just like you were trying to get Brandon Saad from the Chicago Blackhawks last year. You know, there's a baseline set that's the kind of winger that Snow wants. He's looking for a good young guy. If he can't have Vanek, he's looking for a good young guy that can step in, or is kind of playing on a second or third line now, but has a higher ceiling like a Brandon Saad. It can be that a key cog and do some of the dirty work and stuff. Like I said, if you're going to Minnesota, you got to talk about Charlie Coyle or Backlund or something. I know there's been a lot of talk about about Dumba, who maybe he needs to change his scenery. He's a defenseman that maybe we could use. I don't know. Would I be thrilled with a return like that? I'd have to see what else is coming. I'm not the biggest Dumbo guy, but I understand Minnesota's looking to trade him. He's had a rough go at it this year. So you got to get a guy that's close. Don't get a guy that don't get a draft pick. You can get a draft pick, but there's got to be other pieces in there. If they're just going to go trade him for a first and a fourth, that's upsetting to me because that's not something tangible for me. That doesn't give me the hope.
Unless you're going to parlay those picks into a player.
You're going to
down the
Minnesota
line.
and you're bringing back a Charlie Coyle. You're bringing back a Dumba or something. Okay, it's something tangible. It's something we can use now. It's something we can use next year immediately. Great. It's not something that we're drafting this guy 18th overall. He's a project. He'll be 3 years away. He's Anthony Mantha, reincarnated, but we're excited about him. Okay, great. So what are you going to do then for the next 3 years until this guy that you're excited about is ready to? And so to me, it's got to be tangible stuff. There are trades out there for tangible guys, especially with where the cap is now and the way that things are. Like I said, Washington was willing to trade Newverth. It sounded like for McDonald a few months ago, but the Islanders at the time were down defensemen, and they were certainly not going to do that, and I didn't blame them for that at the time. But if you can go and address one of these other holes,
but that would address the hole.
Correct.
Neuwirth is a young goalie.
Now it would. Now Washington's trying to figure out who we keeping, Neuwirth or Holtby. They got the other guy's name escapes me, but they got this other guy who's coming up through the ranks. They got 3 good young goaltenders. Anaheim's got goaltenders. We don't know what they're gonna do with Hiller, but there are outside the box moves to be made, and the Islanders will have 10 days to think about them when they come back from the Olympic break. And they really should take a hard look at some of that because you need to get something tangible. You need to soften the blow of another lost year.
Yeah, and I think, and I was very vocal about it, and it's the last point I have to make today. I said it when it happened. You have waited too long to make a coaching change.
Well,
because
that's something else that has
Peter
to happen.
Laviolette's behind the bench at Team USA. Right?
Yes, he is.
Okay, but that team's making a little bit of noise.
You think? Could I have been more wrong? I mean, I bashed this team. I didn't think they would do anything.
So, what do you think's going to happen when they come back from the Olympics? You think Laviolette, when we had the opportunity, when really we were the only team that was going to talk to him, now you're past the hump. I'm sure that there are 3 or 4 teams that are looking to fire their coaches. Now, you've got to go and compete with these other teams to either lock him up before the season ends or go into a bidding war with them during the summer. Assuming that's the guy you want, and I don't know why he wouldn't be the guy that you want. But the problem is, you hung on to Capuano too long. He should have been gone the 1st of December. They hung on too long. Not only because he put us in a hole that we can't get out of, but and I said this, the longer you wait, the more teams there are looking to get rid of their coach midway through the season. More so than 30 games in.
I think the Islanders have been very fortunate that Florida promoted from within and looks like they're going to keep their coach now. Winnipeg made their move, and we talked about it. And then while we were on the air, they hired Paul Maurice, and by the way, he's done a pretty good job with Winnipeg.
Yes, he has.
So I think the Islanders have been very fortunate to this point that some of the top names that were out there are still out there. Laviolette, guys like that. I don't know how people feel about Boucher, but it's a tough situation. Is Laviolette the best coach in the National Hockey League? No, I mean he seems to wear out his welcome. I mean he's done it in Carolina, he's done it in Philly. Not the most defensive-oriented coach, but he knows how to get the most out of his players and knows what styles to play, and he has the undeniable ability to coach. I mean, let's be real. The Flyers team was nothing special a couple years ago that he coached to the Stanley Cup Finals. But you look at what he maximized that team. And yeah, the players aren't the greatest, and certainly they looked very flat near the end of his tenure there. But have they really gotten better? Yeah, they've gotten over 500. They've been fluttering around 500, but LeCavalier really doesn't look like anything special. I think that was more Holmgren than anything with that team. So you kind of look at that and you go, well, who do you blame more in that situation?
You trade Van Riemsdyk away for Schenn. I mean, your goaltending situation is a disaster. That doesn't fall on Laviolette.
No, and
you get Pronger. He's never going to play again.
Unfortunately, that team didn't make a lot of trades, and you can only change the players over so much before you look at the coach. And at some point in time, Snyder's going to have to look at his GM and realize, he's made some mistakes, too. But for me, that's the guy that I think can get this team over a hump. But like I said, there's a lot still. So while Capuano is not the most ideal coach out there, believe it or not. I know we've had some people that said, I think you're too hard on Capuano. What has he had to work with and this and that. And honestly, he hasn't had a lot to work with. But at the same time, we've seen rosters. I mean, you just look at this roster and you compare it to other teams, and we've seen rosters worse than this that do better because they have more experienced coaches, NHL coaches that have coached their way out of paper bags before. Some coaches that you don't need a lot to work with. Teddy Nolan doesn't need a lot to work with. I mean, by the way, I'm watching Latvia the other night against Sweden, and he's getting a lot out of a team that's made up of Sanders Ojulins and I don't know what else. It's like, I mean, it's a different situation, for guys. Buffalo's not doing the greatest, but they're in every game. They're not getting blown out of the water like they were. So there were coaches.
And let's not forget, that's a ho-hum team because they know they're going to lose Ryan Miller. They already lost Vanek. Derek Roy's gone. Jason Pominville's gone.
The Islanders that year that Ted Nolan was here went from the people looked at the roster and said, "What are you kidding me?"
We were picked to finish last in the Hockey News.
I said, "What are you kidding me?" And even you and I were looking at this like, "How is this going to work?" Well, it's Yashin and this and that. I don't know. It's a bunch of guys. They've put together spare parts and this and that. Well, we'll see how DiPietro does. The defense stepped up. Brendan Wade, a lot of people. He was on his last legs. You could kind of tell at the time that he was on his last leg. Sean Hill, this and that. But he knew whose minutes to limit. He knew what situation guys could or could not play in, and he got the most out of nothing.
And he knew how to push the buttons.
Right, and there are coaches out there like this. I think Peter Laviolette is a guy like that, that knows what buttons to push, that knows which guys to do. You see the very active defense on Team USA, and a lot of that is Peter Laviolette. Pittsburgh does have it sometimes, but Bylsma's not as big of a guy with an active defense as Laviolette is. So when I see, and when you saw Team USA call their timeout the other day, it was Laviolette who was calling the plays, and you could tell he was telling which guys to pinch and things like that. But he knows which guys' buttons to push because you're seeing which guys are pinching and which guys are staying back and which guys are doing what. Peter Laviolette he's a smart hockey man. Okay, he knows players. He knows how to coach against certain players. We've seen it on both ends now. We saw it as a coach here, and he does things better now than he did the first time with the Islanders. And he said that many times that he loved that job because it taught him everything, and he felt he had unfinished business and all that jazz. But he's a guy who knows what buttons to push, knows what to get. So for me, while I know a lot of people say, well, he's worn out his welcome because everybody always tries to downplay when you don't have something you try and downplay it, but when you get it, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's just human nature. But for me, that's a guy who I can get more out of this current makeup of a roster.
Yeah. You can make the case for Capuano hasn't had much to work with, but that case falls on deaf ears when you look at sloppy line changes, mismatched lines, a lack of passion, the inability to call a timeout. None of that has to do with the people
Matchup
on
problems,
his bench.
yeah.
These are all on him. So it doesn't matter. He could have you, me, and my dog out on the playing on the team. But if he had some passion and he was trying to get the most out of us and we were changing lines properly and he was putting us up against the right lines, then yeah, it would make sense.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do it.
Yeah. So to me that's something else that does need to happen. And by the way, Vanek aside, getting a different kind of a coach and a different kind of a philosophy in here is something that can go a long way to changing perception around the hockey world too, and send a message. Then you can look at the Thomas Vaneks and then they go, you know what? This team is making widespread changes. And, Peter Laviolette's a good coach. You know what? I like these changes. I'm more likely to stay now, even if they do trade me, because I can see that they understand what they have to do.
Right.
And
I said that too. If you go and you fire Capuano and you bring in a real NHL coach, it makes it more appealing. And maybe he does sign that 7-year, $7.5 million contract. You're not put in the position where you have to go to the max, because he's going to say, all right, well, you know what? They want to keep me here. I got great chemistry with John and Kyle, so we're a top line. They brought in a real coach. They're making a real push. We're going into this new Brooklyn.
Right.
But,
and I understand, like some people say he hasn't had a fair shake. It's not, how can you say? We had somebody on the Twitter who, fair opinion. It was a good opinion. We appreciate your input. Who was turned off by the fact that we were so critical of Capuano and that. But some things run its course, and this is one of those things that's run its course
too long.
And there comes a point in time where you realize, okay, it's not working. There's a lot that's wrong. Some of the players don't fit, absolutely. But there are things that are happening to this team that don't happen to other teams. The differences in the third period scoring, the collapses, the inability to get up for games, the line matchup problems that falls upon coaching and not understanding a player's limitations, not understanding what situation to put players in, and not limiting guys' minutes. I look at Andrew McDonald as a big part of that, because I do truly think that Andrew McDonald is a good second pairing defenseman. The problem is he's playing 25 minutes a night, filling shoes that he was never meant to fill. Yeah, he's put up points this year, but it's very hard to fill Mark Strite's shoes. You got to be a pure offensive defenseman, and Andrew McDonald has never been a pure offensive defenseman. Lubomir Vishnowsky has been. So not understanding the limitations of guys and putting them in situations where it looks like, that's part of the problem for me with like the Andrew McDonald thing. And he blocks a lot of shots, and that's valuable, and he's probably going to get his $5 million on the open market. But, things like that is, I look at it and I go, okay, the Islanders didn't use him right. Well, that's a coaching thing. Well, he's not the greatest. He's not worth that to me, and that's another issue in and of itself. But when I look at it all, I think it starts, somewhere there, and it ends up flowing down.
The scratching of Brock Nelson when it wasn't necessary, the inability to scratch Josh Bailey when you had to, the limited ice time for Grabner, even when he was playing well.
That's right.
None of it makes sense, and all of it tells me that you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know how to run the team.
I know a lot of people look at Pierre-Marc Bouchard and feel he wasn't given a fair shake, that he was on the third line the whole time. He was on one practice for Tavares in preseason.
He's a 35-year-old concussion. Where did people think he was going to play?
That's what I was saying. I wasn't handing this guy a first-line spot. A lot of people were upset with that. I was a little surprised to see that reaction, but, and to me, some of it is on Snow, some of it is on Capuano. When I look at some of these players, there are guys that need to go. Yes, there are guys that need to go. But, you get the sense that in a different situation or with a different structure on this in this organization, and a different philosophy too, signing free agents and making trades, even if it's dumping guys like this team seems destined to do within the next week or two. I think that there does need to be a little bit of a change. I understand you can't. They always say you can't fire the players, And I don't think that the Islanders are at the point where they need to fire the players just yet, with the exception of maybe, using a Nielsen to get, a position of strength to fill a hole at a weaker position type of thing. But, teams do that all the time where they trade problems for problems. Yeah, we have Josh Bailey on this terrible contract. Well, the Colorado Avalanche had Steve Downey. The Flyers had Talbot on that terrible contract. And what did they do? Let's swap them. Similar styles, but needs change of scenery. Let's swap them. So there's trades like that can be made. Like I mentioned him earlier, Stewart in St. Louis is a guy who looks like he needs to change of scenery. The guy who seems to only be able to really last 2 years wherever he goes. But, if they didn't want to play Grabner, he's struggling. Maybe that's a change of scenery thing, or so it'll be interesting to see how they approach this, because I think it's going to be very telling. If they go with their same route of just we're trading a bunch of guys and we're getting all draft picks in, well, that's disappointing to me because that's nothing tangible to me.
Yeah. All right, that'll do it for us. We'll be back next week. We'll talk more about picks, and we'll start previewing the games that are coming up. For Chris Hessel, I'm Sean Croft. We're all Islanders, and we will see you guys next week.